She stood alone at the train station, her coat too thin, her belly round with life, and her eyes clouded with something between fear and finality. He was just a single dad passing through until he saw her collapse in the snow. What began as an act of instinct would unravel a truth no one could have imagined. The woman he rescued was carrying more than a child. She was carrying a secret that would change his life forever. If you are drawn to stories that restore your faith in love, family, and the quiet power of kindness, you're in the right place. Be sure to subscribe and tap the bell so you won't miss a single moment of what comes next. Now let me take you back to the storm that started it all. The sky over Montana cracked open like a tired seam, spilling snow in thick, frantic flurries. By 6:17 p.m., the last outbound Amtrak train had ground to a halt just outside a nameless station buried under a foot of fresh powder. The engine sputtered. The lights flickered once, then again, and died. Inside car 4B, Ellis Thatcher cradled his sleeping 3-year-old son, Micah, tighter against his chest. He pulled the boy's wool cap down over his ears and whispered, "Almost there, buddy." Not that it mattered. The station they stopped at wasn't even marked on the map, just an abandoned post from a time when people still waited on wooden benches for trains that actually ran on time. Ellis stood up, stretched his aching shoulders, and peered through the window, fogged with breath and frost. That's when he saw her. A woman, collapsed in the snow, pregnant, bareheaded, alone. She was halfway between the station and the rear of the train, just a silhouette being swallowed by the blizzard. At first he thought it was a coat thrown from someone's luggage, but then it moved barely. "Stay here," he murmured, wrapping Micah in a fleece blanket and tucking him into the corner of the train seat. He pulled on his coat, the same one he'd had since the year his wife died, and threw open the door. The wind slapped him hard across the face. Visibility was nearly zero. Snowflakes hit like needles, and the cold bit so fast it burned. Ellis pushed forward, boots sinking deep, his breath jagged. The world narrowed to the dim outline ahead. She was on her knees now, trying to stand, one hand on her swollen belly, the other reaching toward nothing. "Ma'am," he shouted. No answer. He ran the last 10 yards, dropped to his knees beside her. Her lips were blue, her skin nearly the same shade as the snow. Hey, don't go to sleep," he said, cupping her frozen cheeks. "We've got to move. Can you hear me?" She blinked slowly. I didn't make it," she whispered. "Yes, you did. I've got you now." He shrugged off his coat and wrapped it around her. She was trembling so hard he feared she'd seize. Then, with a strength he didn't know he still had, Ellis lifted her into his arms, her body barely more than a husk of exhaustion and frozen breath. The station was little more than a shack, splintered wood, a half-broken bench, and a cast-iron stove rusting in the corner. No power, no insulation, no help. He kicked the door open and laid her on the floor. Micah had followed, wide-eyed, dragging the fleece blanket behind him like a cape. "Good boy," Ellis said, pulling the door shut against the wind. "Stay close to Daddy." He turned back to the woman knelt beside her and checked for signs of hypothermia. Her fingertips were blue, but her breath, though shallow, was steady. He needed fire. Now. Ellis dug into his pack and pulled out the last thing he ever wanted to burn, a small leather-bound notebook. The engine logbook he'd kept from the years he worked maintenance on diesel trains. His last tie to the life before everything fell apart. He hesitated. Then he tore the first page out and fed it into the stove. The second. The third. Soon, a dull orange glow warmed the cold air, flickering shadows across the wooden walls. Micah curled up next to him, watching silently. The woman stirred, lips moving faintly. "She's kicking," she murmured. "Good," Ellis said gently, checking her pulse again. Means she's strong, like her mother. The woman opened her eyes just a little. I couldn't keep walking. I thought, maybe someone would see me. You were lucky, he said. She gave a faint laugh, cracked and hollow. Was I? Ellis reached into his coat pocket and pulled out a lavender-trimmed handkerchief it had once belonged to his late wife, tucked away for no reason other than he couldn't bring himself to throw it out. He wrapped it carefully around her wrist, where frostbite was already settling in. You'll need something to hold on to, he said. It might as well be this. Time passed differently in the storm. Hours folded into silence. Micah fell asleep again on Ellis's lap. The woman slept too, her breathing now slow and steadier, one hand still resting protectively over her stomach. He didn't ask her name. It didn't matter yet. Outside, the wind screamed, but inside the fragile station a strange warmth pulsed, not just from the stove, but from the presence of 3 people who were all in their own way, lost, but not quite alone. By the time dawn filtered through the cracks in the wooden slats, the blizzard had calmed. She was the first to speak. My name is Serafina, she said softly, voice still raspy but clear. I don't have a last name that matters anymore. Ellis looked at her eyes steady. I'm Ellis. That's my son, Micah. You do now. She blinked. I want you to have a name that matters now. You're here. Outside, the snow still blanketed the world, but inside something had shifted. Not quite safety, not quite salvation, but something close. The snow hadn't melted, but the storm had spent itself. Montana mornings, after a blizzard, were eerily quiet, as if the world had paused to consider what it had just survived. Inside the abandoned train station, Ellis crouched near the stove, coaxing the last embers into a small flame with pieces of a wooden bench. The leather cover of his old maintenance log sat discarded in the ashes curling at the edges. He didn't regret it, not when the woman lying on the wool blanket behind him had color in her cheeks again. Serafina. He rolled the name in his mind, trying it out like a tune he hadn't heard before. It felt older than most names. Classical, maybe. Biblical. But when she had said it the night before, it came out fragile, not grand. Almost like an apology. Daddy, a sleepy voice whispered. Micah rubbed his eyes and waddled closer, dragging his stuffed rabbit by one limp ear. Ellis opened his arms, and the boy tucked in against him without a word. For a moment, the station was still save for the soft crackle of fire and Micah's slow breathing. Then music. At first, Ellis thought it was the wind whistling through broken window panes. But no, it had rhythm. Notes. It was a lullaby, barely audible but undeniable, threading itself softly through the chilly morning air. He turned. Serafina was awake, eyes closed, lips parting in a breathy hum. Her hand rested on her belly as she sang not to them, but to someone not yet born. It wasn't in English. Ellis didn't recognize the language, but the melody touched something buried deep in him. Micah stirred and whispered, "She sings like Mama used to." Ellis's chest tightened. He hadn't thought of that song in years. The Skyboat song his late wife Mira had played it on the old upright piano almost every night when Micah was a baby, until the cancer silenced her. The sound faded as Serafina's voice gave way to a tired breath. She opened her eyes slowly. "You're awake," Ellis said. "I never stopped being," she murmured. "Just couldn't tell where I was." "You're in Clearwater County, about 50 miles from anywhere important." She tried to sit up, wincing. Important is relative. Ellis moved to help her, adjusting the folded coat beneath her head. "We'll need to get you checked out at the clinic in town, when the road's clear. Is that where you're taking your son?" He looked down at Micah, who now busied himself by tracing shapes in the frost-covered window. "No," Ellis said quietly. "We live just over the hill. I was taking him to see his grandfather in Billings. First time in a year. Didn't make it, hun, nope. The train didn't either. A silence fell between them, not cold, but uncertain. Ellis reached into his backpack and offered her a metal thermos. Water. Warm enough. She took it with trembling hands, then nodded to the fire. You burned something that mattered to you. Ellis looked at the stove. An old book. Nothing that can't be replaced. Her eyes met his. That's not true. Men don't carry books they don't care about through snowstorms. He chuckled, conceding the point. Fair. That afternoon, when the snow had settled into silence, Ellis led the way down a path he carved himself, cutting through drifts, with a rusted shovel tied to a sled. Micah sat bundled up with a thermos of soup, Serafina riding behind him in a rickety sled that had seen better decades. They reached the cabin by late noon, a weathered A-frame tucked into a grove of pine, with smoke curling from its old chimney, like a signal of quiet endurance. Ellis helped Serafina onto the porch, his hand warm under hers. The moment she stepped inside, she paused. The cabin was modest. A stove, a rocking chair-worn wooden floors. But in the corner near the window, dusted with frost, sat a piano. An upright missing 2 keys, but still standing like it was waiting for someone who hadn't come home in years. She walked to it slowly, like someone approaching a memory. Ellis busied himself stoking the fireplace. It was my wife's. She used to play every evening. Same song. Serafina ran her fingers gently along the top edge. Let me guess. The Sky Boat Song. He turned sharply. You knew it. My grandmother sang it. In Gaelic. Said it was a song for those lost at sea, but meant for anyone who's lost. She sat on the bench. Her hands hovered over the keys. And then she played. Not perfectly, not confidently, but with sincerity. With grief. With healing. Micah leaned into Ellis's side. She remembers Mama's song. Ellis couldn't speak. He just watched. And listened. As the notes filled the cabin, the room didn't feel like a place people passed through. It felt like something solid. Something you could belong to. Later that night, Ellis brought her a folded blanket and a spare pillow. He set them gently on the couch, unsure if he should say more. Why are you helping me? She asked suddenly. Ellis paused. Because you needed help. But people usually expect something. Questions, answers, names. He sat down across from her, leaning his forearms on his knees. My wife died because we were 30 minutes late to the hospital during a storm. That's not a mistake I'll make again. Serafina's face softened. I'm sorry. So am I, he said. But if you're here, maybe something can be different this time. She nodded. Then, unexpectedly, she took the lavender-trimmed handkerchief he'd tied around her wrist earlier and began to embroider a small green pine tree into one corner. A gesture. A beginning. I'll return this when I leave, she said. Ellis looked at her, something in him both guarded and quietly hopeful. Maybe he said you won't need to. Ellis wasn't a man prone to sentiment. He didn't keep photos framed on the mantel or write dates on calendars. Life, as far as he was concerned, moved forward like a train on rusted tracks, loud, relentless, and indifferent. But there were certain things he did hold on to quietly, stubbornly. One of them was a chair. It had belonged to Mira, his late wife. A simple, high-backed maple chair she used at the kitchen table right across from his. After she died, he had pushed it under the table and never touched it again. Not even when Micah, barely walking at the time, began toddling around looking for her shadow in the house. Now, as the soft sound of piano notes drifted from the living room, where Serafina played in the evenings, Ellis found himself standing in the barn staring at a third chair. It was dusty, forgotten in a corner, once part of a set he'd picked up at a yard sale a decade ago. He'd never needed it. Until now. He ran a hand over the worn wood, surprised by the urge rising in his chest, not just to offer a seat, but to make space for someone who might stay. In the days that followed her arrival, Serafina moved through the cabin like someone trying not to disturb the air. She took small steps, offered soft words, and never touched anything she wasn't invited to. But her presence was undeniable. She started keeping a kettle on the stove, made soup from whatever Ellis had in his pantry, and folded Micah's clothes without being asked. She swept floors that didn't need sweeping and re-stitched worn hems in Ellis's old flannel shirts. None of it was grand, but all of it was deeply human, like she was building a home without ever calling it one. And Micah, he was smitten. He followed her from room to room, asking questions no adult would answer. Do babies remember the inside of your tummy? Or, why do some people disappear when it snows? Serafina never brushed him off. She answered with metaphors and warmth, and Ellis watched his son bloom in ways he hadn't seen since Mira's funeral. One morning as Ellis fixed the porch steps, he noticed Micah drawing something with a stick in the snow. What you got there, bud? Micah looked up, face serious. A family. Ellis peered closer. 4 stick figures. One small one, slightly bigger. One tall. And one with a round belly. He swallowed. That's a good picture. Micah nodded. It's us. Ellis looked toward the window where Serafina sat with her knitting. She didn't see them, but in that moment he knew something irreversible had taken root. That night, after Micah went to sleep, Ellis brought the extra chair in from the barn. Serafina sat on the couch embroidering a pine tree onto the same lavender-trimmed handkerchief. She looked up as he entered, brushing a loose curl from her face. "What's that?" she asked. Ellis cleared his throat. "It's a chair. I can see that." He gave a half smile. "I thought maybe the table was a little unbalanced. Figured it was time to fix that." Serafina said nothing, but her hand stilled on the fabric. He set the chair down, slowly pulling it out so it faced Mira's empty seat, now hers by silent inheritance. "No pressure," Ellis said after a pause. "It doesn't have to mean anything." Serafina stood, walked to the chair, placed the folded handkerchief on the seat. "I think it already does." That evening she played again, not a lullaby, but something new. Light. Hopeful. It wasn't flawless, but Ellis didn't care. He sat at the kitchen table listening, the soft warmth of the fire on his face, and for the first time in 4 years, he realized he wasn't waiting for the silence to end. He was listening to what came after it. Later that night, while Serafina was washing up in the bathroom and Micah slept, curled like a comma in his bed, Ellis pulled out an old tin box from beneath the floorboard. It contained small things, a photograph of Mira, a pressed flower from their wedding, and a faded letter she had once written but never mailed. He didn't open it. Instead, he added something new, a folded napkin with a hand-drawn pine tree stitched into the corner. Then he replaced the floorboard and sat in the new chair, letting the weight of everything he'd held on to drift around him like snow outside the cabin window. The next morning, Serafina emerged from her room holding a bundle wrapped in an old shawl. "I'd like to visit the field," she said. Ellis blinked. "You mean the hayfield?" She nodded. "I need to walk, feel something real." He hesitated. "It's cold." "I know, but I need it." So they went. Slowly. He helped her down the steps, and Micah trotted ahead like a puppy kicking snow into the air. The field stretched wide and silent, the sky bluer than it had been in weeks. The wind was gentle, just enough to make Serafina close her eyes and lift her chin. "This is good land," she said. Ellis nodded. "It's not fancy, but it grows things." She turned to him. "Maybe that's enough." He looked at her, really looked, and saw not just the exhaustion in her face, or the burden of carrying new life, but a strength he hadn't recognized before. Something deep-rooted like prairie grass made for storms, not sunshine. And he realized he wanted her to stay. Not as a guest, not as a duty, but as someone who belonged. That night, he carved something into the third chair. Not words, just a small pine tree etched into the backrest. A silent promise. The winter sun in Montana was a trickster, bright but cold as bone. Its light poured through the frosted windows of Ellis's cabin, like honey over ice, golden but useless against the bite in the air. Serafina sat near the fire, the lavender-trimmed handkerchief stretched taut in her lap. Her needle moved with slow, deliberate grace. A second pine tree was forming beside the first, smaller, curved slightly toward it. A child pine. Ellis watched from the kitchen, pretending to focus on peeling potatoes. In truth, he'd been stealing glances for days. Something about the way she moved, quiet, assured, felt like watching someone rearrange a room you didn't realize had gone dark. Micah darted past her, chasing a rubber ball between furniture legs. He stopped abruptly, gazing at her stitching. "What's that one for?" he asked, pointing. "This little tree," she replied, brushing hair from her cheek. "It's for the one who hasn't come yet." The baby Serafina nodded. Micah leaned in, whispering, "Do you think she'll like me?" Serafina smiled. "She already does. You're her big brother." Micah puffed up as if the title itself carried a weight he was proud to bear. Ellis cleared his throat. "Dinner's almost ready." Serafina looked up, her eyes reflecting more than firelight. "Ellis, you don't have to keep cooking every night. You're carrying a baby. I'll keep cooking." She held his gaze for a second longer than was comfortable, but didn't argue. There was something settling between them now, not romance, not yet, but a mutual regard, a rhythm. Two people used to walking alone, who'd started matching each other's pace without realizing it. After dinner, Ellis stepped outside to fetch firewood. The cold hit harder than he expected, slicing through his jacket as he stepped into the crunching snow. The moon had risen bright and full, bathing the land in silver. He paused for a breath. Then he heard at the piano. It was faint, hesitant but unmistakable. Serafina. He moved quietly to the window. She didn't know he was watching. Her back was to him, shoulders curved, her fingers exploring the keys like they were learning her all over again. She was playing something unfamiliar, a tune that was sorrowful at the edges, but hopeful at its core. Not Mira's lullaby, not a hymn. It was her own. Inside, the fire dimmed, and Micah drifted off in the rocking chair, his rabbit falling to the floor. Ellis didn't move him, just covered the boy with a blanket and let him sleep. Serafina turned on the bench. "I didn't mean to play loud." "You weren't. It was good," Ellis said. She looked at him carefully, then gestured to the lavender handkerchief. "I finished it." He walked over slowly. The embroidery was simple but beautiful, 2 pine trees, and a small third one between them. Beneath it, she had stitched a single word in delicate script. "Hope." He swallowed. "You didn't have to. I did." Her voice was firm. "Because I owe you more than a thank you. You don't owe me anything, Serafina." She shook her head gently. "I disagree." Then she stood, walked to the mantel, and placed the handkerchief on a small wooden stand, beside a photo of Mira, one Ellis hadn't touched in years. Not once. "I don't want to replace her," Serafina said quietly, "but I'd like to honor what you had, by not pretending it never existed." Ellis looked at the photo, then at the handkerchief. "I never showed anyone that picture. I didn't need to see it to know she mattered." The next day, Serafina asked to help with the chores. Ellis tried to argue, but she insisted. So they spent the morning in the barn, she brushing down the old mare, while he mucked out stalls. Micah sang to the goats who ignored him, as goats always did. As they worked, Ellis asked, "Do you ever miss where you came from?" Serafina paused. "Sometimes. But it's not the place I miss. Just the idea of it." "What idea?" "That home is somewhere you choose, not somewhere you're born into." He looked at her. "Is that what you're doing now?" "Choosing." She didn't answer right away. "I'm considering it." Later, while Ellis repaired a broken fence post, Serafina sat beneath the pine tree out back, her hand over her stomach. The air was quiet. No trains, no clocks, just wind and branches and the distant call of a hawk. She closed her eyes. For the first time in a long time, she wasn't hiding. Not from lawyers, not from tabloids, not from inheritance battles or headlines that never got the story right. Here she was, just Serafina, a woman with no last name worth mentioning, a woman carrying a child whose future had not yet been defined by legacy or land, and a woman who, despite herself, had begun to feel like she belonged to something real. That evening, Ellis found her in the kitchen quietly humming the same tune she'd played on the piano. The handkerchief was now resting beneath a small jar of wildflowers on the table, lavender pale bluebells and a sprig of pine. He walked in holding a small hand-sanded block of wood. "What's that?" she asked. "Micah wanted to make a gift for the baby." I helped a little. He turned it over in his hands and placed it on the table. It was a simple carving, a tiny rocking horse. Serafina reached out, touched it gently. "It's beautiful." He said he wanted the baby to know she had a brother waiting for her. Her eyes shimmered. "And maybe a home, too." Ellis didn't answer. He just looked at her and said softly, "You're welcome to stay as long as you want." She nodded, eyes full voice, barely above a whisper. "Maybe I will." The wind that morning was sharper than usual. It howled through the pine trees like a warning from something long gone, and Ellis felt it in his bones before he even opened the door. He paused with his hand on the knob, glanced back at Serafina stirring oatmeal on the stove. "You okay?" he asked. She didn't turn around. "Just a little cold," she said. But the way her shoulders stiffened told him there was something else beneath the surface. Micah sat at the table, legs swinging, spooning cereal into his mouth with wild abandon. "Can we go to the hill today?" he asked between bites. "The one with the 2 trees." Serafina turned, then her eyes softer than her voice. "Maybe, if it's not too windy." Ellis poured coffee, leaned against the counter, and studied her. She'd been quieter since yesterday, still present, still kind, but the light in her eyes dimmed just slightly, like something old had crept back into the room and settled near her. Later that afternoon, when Micah went down for a nap, and the cabin sank into its usual post-lunch stillness, Ellis found her outside, standing by the barn. She was staring at the ridge, where the snow hadn't quite melted, yet her arms folded, lips tight. "Place still gets to you?" he asked gently. She blinked as if startled. "It's not the place." Ellis waited. After a long moment, she said, "There's something about silence. It lets ghosts get closer." Ellis didn't laugh or ask what she meant. He knew. She continued, "When it's loud, when there are cities, and noise, and emails, and traffic, you can ignore things. But out here, there's nowhere for them to hide." Ellis finished. She nodded. "I thought I'd buried them well. Turns out I just distracted myself enough to forget where I left the shovel." He stepped closer, the cold air between them thick with something unspoken. "You don't have to tell me anything, but I want to." She looked at him, really looked, and he saw in her face not fear, but exhaustion. The kind that didn't come from running, but from running too long without being caught. They sat on the porch steps. The wind had softened, and the pine trees swayed gently like old women whispering prayers. "I was married once," Serafina said, staring at her hands. to a man who loved the idea of me more than the person I was. Ellis nodded slowly, saying nothing. He was from an old family, wealthy, traditional. My last name, Wynn, isn't mine by blood. It was his. But the land, the money, it all got tangled up in my name when he died in a plane crash 3 years ago. Suddenly, I wasn't just his widow. I was the reclusive heiress. Her voice dipped into bitterness. The press loved that one. Headlines, lawyers, vultures in silk ties. Everyone wanted a piece of something, and none of them asked how I was sleeping at night. "And were you?" Ellis asked softly. "Barely." She looked at him, then down at her belly. "When I found out I was pregnant, the noise got louder. His family thought the baby would give them leverage, proof of legacy, a reason to drag me back into court, into that house, into that name. So you ran," he said, "not as an accusation but as a confirmation. I took nothing but what I could carry and went off-grid. Changed trains, discarded credit cards, burned the version of me they wanted, and hoped there was still something underneath worth keeping." Ellis was quiet for a long moment. Then he said, "I know a little about burning things to survive." She smiled faintly. "You mean your logbook?" He shook his head. "I meant my hope." She turned toward him fully now. "What happened to her?" "Your wife, Mira," he said. "She had breast cancer. We caught it. Late, tried everything. Chemo, trials, prayer. When the end came, it came hard. We were trying to get to the hospital during a snowstorm. The roads were bad. By the time we made it..." He stopped, jaw tightening. "She died in the truck," he said, voice flat. Micah was still in diapers. I was holding her hand with one, and the steering wheel with the other. Serafina closed her eyes. "I'm sorry. I don't say that to earn pity, just to explain why I don't leave people behind anymore." The silence that followed wasn't heavy. It was healing. Two people sitting beside their ghosts, not asking them to leave, but asking them to make room for the living. That night, Serafina placed the lavender handkerchief on Mira's old chair. Then she added something new, a small ceramic bird she had found in the barn's rafters, cleaned and repainted. It was white with a faint purple hue, its wings stretched as if mid-flight. Ellis watched her. "Where'd you find that hiding?" she said. "Like the rest of us." Micah, now drowsy in pajamas, climbed into Ellis's lap. "Daddy, do ghosts get cold?" Ellis looked down, surprised. "Why do you ask that?" "Because sometimes I think Mommy visits when it snows." Ellis met Serafina's gaze. I think he said slowly that ghosts don't feel cold anymore, but they might still remember what warmth feels like. Micah nodded solemnly. "I'll leave a blanket out next time." They all laughed gently, not because it was funny, but because it was true. As the fire burned low, Serafina opened the piano bench and placed a sheet of music inside. It wasn't Mira's. It wasn't hers. It was a song Micah had hummed to her that morning while playing with toy blocks. The title, written in Serafina's looping hand, "A Home for Hope." She closed the bench softly and whispered, just in case the ghosts ever want to hear something new. The snow began to melt in the quietest way possible, dripping from the eaves of the cabin, like a secret finally being whispered aloud. Spring in Montana didn't arrive with blossoms or birdsong. It came in puddles, in mud-caked boots, by the door in the wet bark of trees shedding their frost, and in the faintest shift of light softening the world by degrees. Serafina noticed it first. "There's green under the white," she said one morning, standing barefoot at the threshold of the porch, hand resting lightly on her belly. "It's like the ground's been holding its breath." Ellis joined her, steaming mug in hand. "We all have." She smiled, though a flicker of something unreadable passed through her eyes. It was a look Ellis had come to recognize, a glance backward, not forward. That afternoon, while Micah painted pine cones with watercolors at the kitchen table, a knock came at the door. Not loud, not urgent, but deliberate. Ellis exchanged a quick look with Serafina, then opened it. A man in a black wool coat stood at the threshold, middle-aged, well-groomed, but with the unmistakable air of someone used to being obeyed. Behind him was a black SUV, parked at the edge of the tree line, gleaming out of place in the muddy slush. "Good afternoon," the man said, polite, but clipped. "I'm looking for someone. I believe she may be here under different circumstances." Ellis didn't move. "Who's asking?" The man reached into his coat and produced a card. White, clean, minimal. Thomas Greeley, Family Council, Cavendish. Wynn Holdings behind Ellis, Serafina stood. Their eyes met, and for the first time in weeks, she looked afraid. She stepped forward. "You found me faster than I expected." Greeley gave a small nod. "You weren't hiding well, Serafina, and frankly, you shouldn't have to." Ellis stiffened. Greeley turned to him, calm and respectful. "Sir, I'm not here to cause trouble, only to deliver documents and confirm Ms. Wynn's well-being." "She doesn't use that name," Ellis said quietly. Greeley's expression didn't change. "Names are complicated things." He handed Serafina a thick envelope, legal-sized, heavy. "I've included a summary of the estate affairs statements from the board and the final order from the probate court. As of last week, you are the uncontested majority stakeholder. The Cavendish family is withdrawing. Permanently." Serafina took the envelope like it was ticking. "And the press?" she asked. Greeley shrugged. "They've moved on. You've been replaced by a pop star's custody battle and a senator's secret second family." Ellis almost smiled. "Almost." Serafina nodded. "Thank you, Tom." Greeley hesitated. "I never agreed with how they treated you. I hope you find peace wherever you choose to stay." And just like that, he was gone, swallowed by the trees, the SUV disappearing down the slushy trail without another word. Serafina didn't open the envelope. She left it on the kitchen table beside Micah's wet pine cones. That evening, she stood by the firearms crossed over her middle. "I thought it would feel like a door opening," she said. "Instead, it feels like something I shut years ago just turned around and stared back at me." Ellis dried his hands on a towel. "What's in the envelope? Power. Land. Money." She looked at him. "None of which I want." "Then throw it away." "I can't," she said softly, "because part of me knows it could help someone. People. Whole towns. Farms on the edge of bankruptcy. Families who don't have a second chance." Ellis stepped closer. "And you think that's your job now?" "I don't know," she whispered. "But if I walk away completely, I'm not sure I'll like who I become." Later that night, after Micah had gone to bed, and the house had settled into the quiet murmur of fire and pine, Serafina sat at the kitchen table, the envelope finally open in front of her. She didn't read the figures, didn't study the land maps or dividend statements. Instead, she opened the last folded page, a letter, handwritten, on thick ivory paper. "Serafina, you never wanted this legacy, but you carry it whether you claim it or not. If you read this, it means you outlasted the noise, which means you're stronger than we ever gave you credit for. If you can use it to heal what we broke, do it. But if not, walk away, and let that be your freedom. You were always more than the land. Aunt Helena." Serafina read it twice. Then she folded the letter and placed it inside a drawer beneath the silverware. She didn't cry. She didn't speak. But Ellis, watching from the hallway, saw something shift in her posture. Not defeat. Conviction. The next day, she drove the old truck to town with Ellis. She wore a coat that didn't fit well, boots too loose around the ankles. No makeup. No assistant. No press. At the hardware store, she bought garden tools and fencing supplies. At the feed shop, she ordered seeds. Not for wheat or barley, but for lavender tomatoes and corn meant for families, not profit margins. And at the county clerk's office, she filled out a form. Ellis read the top line. New business registration, Hope Ridge Community Garden. Initiative owner, Serafina Grace, no last name. That evening, she handed Ellis a folder with her signature on the final page. I'm keeping the land, she said, but not the name, not the companies, just the fields. Ellis looked at her quiet. You're sure? She nodded. They chased me for a name. But out here, I get to build something that doesn't need one. Just roots. He smiled then. Not wide, but real. Guess we'll need more shovels. The call came just after sunrise, while Ellis was hauling feed from the barn. The phone rang inside the cabin, an old landline mounted to the wall, the kind most people had abandoned. It rarely rang, except for school notices or weather alerts. So when it did, and Ellis heard Serafina's cautious voice say, "It's for you," he wiped his hands on his jeans and walked in with a knot forming in his chest. He picked up the receiver. "This is Ellis Thatcher." A pause. "Mr. Thatcher, this is Judy Withers at First County Bank. I'm calling to confirm receipt of payment on the entirety of your outstanding loan." Ellis straightened. "I'm sorry, what payment?" "Well," Judy said, her tone tightening, "someone paid off your mortgage in full this morning. A wire transfer came through from a trust account. We just wanted to make sure it wasn't a mistake." Ellis glanced at Serafina. She stood at the sink, back turned, shoulders still. "No," he said slowly, watching her. "Not a mistake, but I wasn't expecting it. If you'd like details, I think I already know what I need to know." He hung up. It took him 10 full minutes before he spoke again. By then, Serafina had moved to the porch, arms folded over her belly eyes, watching the sky, as though trying to guess what came next. He joined her. "You paid off the land." She didn't deny it. It was never about ownership, Ellis. "You said once this place grows things. I just wanted to make sure it could keep doing that. I didn't ask for help. I didn't offer it for your sake. Not entirely." She turned to him. "You gave me something I didn't realize I'd been searching for. Shelter without strings, respect without curiosity, a space to breathe. You saved my life, Ellis. I just returned the favor in a way I could." He looked at her, unsure whether to feel grateful or wounded. He hated being a charity case, but deep down he knew this wasn't pity. It was love. Not the kind that asked permission, the kind that simply gave. Still, something shifted that day. Ellis spent more time in the barn, fewer words passed between them. Not because of anger, but because of weight. Something unsaid pressed on them both. That night, he found her at the piano. She wasn't playing, just sitting, fingers curled, eyes unfocused. "When I was little," she said, not looking at him, "I thought, love was something you earned, if you were pretty enough, smart enough, quiet enough, obedient." He sat beside her. "And now I think maybe love is something you offer, and hope someone knows how to hold it." He looked down at his hands, calloused, scarred, built for work, not for holding delicate things. "I'm still learning," he said. She reached over and gently placed her hand over his. "Me too." The next morning, she was gone. The cabin door had been shut quietly. No signs of struggle. No notes. Only the lavender handkerchief folded neatly on the piano bench beside the wooden rocking horse Micah had carved. Micah noticed first. "Where's Sarah?" he asked, rubbing his eyes, clutching his rabbit. Ellis didn't answer. He stared at the porch, the empty horizon, the silence so thick it pressed against his chest like grief. She had left the way she arrived, without warning, without goodbye. The first day passed in confusion, the second in denial, the third in silence. Micah asked less and less. Ellis worked harder mending fences that didn't need fixing, chopping wood they wouldn't burn until summer. He told himself she had her reasons, that maybe she needed to disappear again to keep the baby safe, that maybe her leaving was always inevitable, and what they had shared was just a layover in her flight from a life too heavy to carry. But when he found her coat still hanging behind the door, old, worn, and lined with a name stitched faintly on the inside, Serafina Grace, something inside him cracked. On the 7th day, Ellis found himself at the edge of the ridge, standing beside the 2 pine trees Micah had once painted. He stood there in the wind, the valley spread before him, and spoke aloud for the first time in a week. "You didn't have to run." His voice barely carried. "I was never going to ask you to be anyone but yourself." The wind rustled the needles like applause, or maybe regret. That evening, as dusk settled, the truck rumbled into the drive. Not Ellis's truck. A different one, sleek black, dusted with road salt and exhaustion. Serafina stepped out slowly. She looked smaller than he remembered. Or maybe the hole she left had just made everything around her seem bigger. Ellis didn't move. Neither did she. Then she said, "I thought disappearing would protect what mattered most." He crossed his arms. And I realized I was protecting the wrong thing. She stepped closer. "I wasn't running from you, Ellis. I was running from the fear that nothing this real could last, that if I stayed, I'd ruin it. You didn't ruin anything. I needed to know I could choose this life freely, not because you saved me, not because I was afraid, but because I wanted to stay." She handed him a piece of paper. It was a deed transfer not to the entire land portfolio, just the acreage surrounding the cabin, the barn, the ridge, and the garden. "I signed it over to you and Micah. Permanently." Ellis looked up, stunned. "Why, because this is yours. Because I want to build something next to it, not inside it." She hesitated. "If you'll let me." Ellis looked at the paper, then at her. Then slowly he stepped forward and pulled her into an embrace that said everything his words never could. Micah burst through the door barefoot and grinning, his rabbit in hand. "Sarah." "You came back." She knelt, arms open, eyes full. "I never really left," she whispered as he threw himself into her arms. Spring arrived in earnest the next week, not with ceremony, but with soft rebellions. The snow melted in the low valley first, revealing shy blades of grass and earth that smelled of old roots and new beginnings. The sky shifted from cold silver to pale blue. Robins returned, and in the fields beyond the ridge, green stretched where white once held dominion. Ellis stood on the porch early one morning, coffee warming his hands. Beside him, Serafina knelt in the garden plot, marking out rows in the soil with a wooden dowel. Micah chased a chicken named Penny in joyful, squealing circles, while his flannel shirt billowed like a flag of childhood. Life was returning, not just to the land, but to him. He never said it aloud, but each morning he woke up surprised to find her still there. Every day felt like a kind of grace he didn't deserve, but didn't dare question. He only hoped it would last. That afternoon, while Serafina baked in the kitchen lavender muffins, of course Ellis made a trip to the county office in town. It wasn't something he planned exactly, just something that had lingered long enough to need doing. He approached the front desk and gave his name. The clerk, a woman in her 60s with cat-eye glasses, pulled out a dusty folder with a soft smile. "I was wondering when you'd come in about this," she said. Ellis frowned. "About what?" She slid the folder toward him. "Land title adjustment. New co-owner paperwork filed 2 weeks ago. One Miss Serafina Grace." He opened the file and froze. The land his land, the cabin, the barn, The pasture behind the hill was now co-signed, his name and hers. Effective immediately, the clerk continued, Ms. Grace declined the use of her legal surname. She requested it be registered under the name Serafina Grace. No last name. No title. Just Grace. Ellis swallowed. Underneath the legal language, Serafina had handwritten a note in ink that had smudged faintly along the edge. Not a gift. A declaration. This is where I choose to belong. He left the office in a daze. Outside, the breeze was warm, carrying scents of lilac and tilled earth. He drove back with one hand on the wheel, the other resting over the folder in the passenger seat, like it might disappear if he didn't keep it close. When he returned, Serafina was on the porch reading to Micah, who lay sprawled across her lap, eyes closed, but still listening. She looked up when she saw him. Went to town, she asked. He nodded, still standing by the truck. She waited. Patient. Finally, he walked up the steps and handed her the folder. She opened it, leafed through, and closed it again. I thought you should know, she said simply. Ellis sat beside her. No one's ever given me land before, he said, voice low. Not even my father. I didn't give it to you, she corrected. I named it. He looked at her. She touched his hand, her fingers rough from garden work but gentle as breath. I named this land with your name, and mine, she said, because names are promises, and I'm tired of breaking mine. That night, Micah fell asleep under a quilt that smelled faintly of lemon and smoke. Ellis and Serafina sat on the back steps, listening to coyotes howl in the distant ridge. The stars were especially bright, sharper somehow, like someone had wiped the sky clean for clarity. You ever think about going back? Ellis asked. She wrapped her sweater tighter around her shoulders. To the estate. He nodded. I think about what I could do with it, she admitted. The schools it could fund, the farms it could rescue. But I don't think about living there. He waited. I think the land I really care about is the kind I can touch, the kind with dirt under my fingernails and weeds I recognize. I want to see what grows when I stop running. Ellis took a long breath. You're not just planting seeds out there, he said. I know. He looked at her. Neither am I. A few days later, while clearing the shed, Ellis found a worn cedar plaque tucked behind an old wheelbarrow. It was one Mira had carved long ago, her dream for the place, back when they still had dreams to carve. It read, Hope Ridge. The letters were faded, but still legible. He brought it inside, dusted it, and showed it to Serafina. Her eyes shimmered. Did you name the garden that because of her, I think? She named it for what we'd need most to survive here. Serafina traced the letters with her fingers. I want to hang it on the front gate, she said. Not for us, for whoever comes next. So they know they're welcome too. Ellis nodded. Then we'll make a new gate, and they did. Together, they built a wooden arch over the entrance to the garden, weather-sealed it, and mounted the plaque beneath a row of string lights. The first seedlings sprouted the same week. Micah named each one after animals. This one's Mousy, that one's Hedgehog. Serafina let him label the rows with hand-drawn signs. Ellis pretended not to care, but he reinforced the garden fence with extra lumber, just in case the deer got curious. And one quiet Sunday morning, as they sat on the porch, drinking coffee while Micah napped inside, Serafina said something that surprised him. I used to hate my name. He looked at her. Why? Because it never felt like mine. It was always tied to someone else's legacy, someone else's shame or pride or title. She glanced at him. But now, here, Serafina Grace feels like someone I'd choose to be, not someone I was told I had to become. Ellis reached over and took her hand. Well, he said, she's someone I'd choose too. The first storm of summer came in fast, and mean, with a belly full of thunder and wind that tore across the fields like it had unfinished business. Rain lashed the windows of the cabin, bending the tall grass outside and flattening the newly planted tomato stalks. Ellis bolted the shutters, while Serafina gathered candles and checked on Micah, who sat wide-eyed but thrilled by the noise. "Is the sky mad?" he asked, as the thunder rolled overhead. "No, sweetheart," she said, pressing a kiss to his forehead. "Just loud." Lightning forked across the distant ridge, illuminating the trees for a split second before plunging everything into darkness. Then the power cut out. The cabin fell into silence, broken only by the rhythm of the rain and the steady beat of Micah's questions. Serafina lit a candle and set it on the piano. The flame wobbled in the wind's breath that crept through the window frames. Ellis stepped in from the porch, soaked to the elbows. "Barns secured. The chickens are grumpy, but alive." She handed him a towel. "I hope this isn't the storm Mira didn't finish arguing with." He raised an eyebrow. She shrugged. "Just something Micah said. About ghosts." Ellis chuckled softly, then rubbed his face dry. "I think she'd appreciate the drama." They sat in the living room, each with a blanket and cup of tea. The storm howled, but inside it felt strangely safe, like a memory being retold rather than a danger to escape. "I always hated storms growing up," Serafina said. "They made the big house feel even lonelier. Too many rooms, too many echoes." Ellis nodded. Mira loved storms. She said they cleared out the noise, gave the world a reset. Serafina tilted her head. "Do you believe that he thought for a moment? Maybe not all at once, but I think sometimes a storm takes something you don't realize you've been holding on to and forces you to let it go." Outside, the wind began to shift, softening its edges. Rain still fell, but less fiercely now, like the earth had finally exhaled. The next morning, the world was dripping and still. The garden had taken a hit, but most of it stood strong stalks, bent but not broken. Micah ran out in his rubber boots, splashing in puddles and laughing with the defiance only children can afford. Ellis and Serafina stood on the porch surveying the damage. "I can fix the fence," he said. "Maybe shore up the south gate." She nodded. "And I'll replant the herbs." The basil took a beating, but something hung between them, unspoken like static after a lightning strike. Serafina broke the silence. "I need to leave for a few days." Ellis turned to her slowly. "Leave." She nodded, eyes steady. "Just to finish something. Something I started before I came here." His jaw tensed. "Do I get to know what that something is?" She placed a hand on his chest. "I'm not running. I'm anchoring." Ellis said nothing for a moment, then looked past her to where Micah danced through the grass. "Will you come back?" She didn't hesitate. Yes. She left the next morning before sunrise, driving the old truck down the winding dirt road with a small bag and the lavender-trimmed handkerchief tucked in her coat pocket. Micah stood by the window, confused, but not sad. "She said she'll be back soon," he whispered to himself. "And when she does, she'll bring the wind that smells like her garden." 3 days passed. Each night Ellis left the porch light on, even though he knew she wouldn't return in darkness. He repaired the fence, repainted the tool shed, sorted through Mira's old books, and found to his surprise a volume of poetry Serafina had quoted once. He left it on the nightstand beside her bed. He didn't ask where she went. He didn't need to. Whatever called her away had to do with closure, with family, with freeing herself fully and finally. And he trusted her to return. On the 4th morning, just as the sun broke over the ridge, the wind changed. It came from the south, soft scented with sage and distant rain, and carried with it something else lavender. Micah, still in his pajamas, stood barefoot on the porch. "She's coming," he said simply. And she did. The truck rolled into view at the edge of the field. Serafina stepped out wearing a new coat and a quiet smile. In her hands was a leather folder, worn but neat, and in her eyes was something settled, like the end of a long song. She walked toward Ellis, and he met her halfway. No words, just an embrace. When they stepped apart, she handed him the folder. Inside was a finalized document, the full dissolution of her shares in Cavendish Wynn Holdings, along with the transfer of several parcels of land to rural communities and agricultural trusts. "I kept nothing but what matters," she said, "and gave the rest where it might grow." Ellis flipped through the papers. "You turned it all into seeds." She smiled. "Isn't that what land's for?" Micah ran to her, arms open. "Did you bring back the wind? I think it followed me," she said, kneeling to hug him. "Smell it," he nodded. "It smells like you." That evening, Ellis found her at the piano. She was humming softly, eyes closed, fingers tracing the keys without playing. "Write something new?" he asked. She nodded. "It's called Lavender Wind. Can I hear it?" "Not yet," she said, smiling. "Some songs take time to find their ending." He sat beside her. "I can wait." Outside, the wind blew through the lavender rose newly planted along the garden's edge. It didn't roar or howl. It whispered. Of home, of healing, of everything that finally stayed. The porch had always held 2 chairs, one for Ellis, one for the ghost of Mira, untouched, unspoken, for yet always there in quiet tribute. Then came the third, brought in from the barn on a cold winter night, creaking gently beneath Serafina's silent acceptance of space. And now, with the summer sun painting everything in gold, Ellis sanded and stained a fourth. A smaller chair, handcrafted from leftover pine, low to the ground, wide-legged for balance, the backrest carved with a single word in careful strokes: hope. He worked on it for days in the shed, shaping it, when Serafina was tending the garden and Micah was chasing bees. It was not a project he rushed. There was a reverence to it, something tender in the way the wood curled from the blade. Every motion whispered of future lullabies, of a baby girl with dark eyes and a wide laugh, of family dinners under the porch light. He had never made furniture for his first child. He hadn't known how. But this time he did. That same week, Serafina began painting the nursery. It wasn't a room, not at first, just the old pantry Mira had used for canning. But Serafina cleared the shelves, washed the walls, and covered them in soft, peach-colored paint. She repurposed old baskets, wove small mobiles from twigs and yarn. The room smelled of rosemary and lemons, and something sweeter in tension. One night, Ellis passed the doorway and stopped. Serafina stood on a step stool, brushing a final coat across the trim. Her shirt was speckled with color, her hair pinned up a pencil tucked behind one ear. And though her belly now curved outward with undeniable certainty, she moved with grace, like a woman completely at home in her body and her moment. "You're building something beautiful," he said. She turned, surprised. "The color?" "No," he replied. "A life." She held his gaze. "It feels like I'm finishing something too. Or rewriting it." He stepped inside, took the brush from her hand, and set it down. Then he leaned in and rested his forehead gently against hers. "I want to raise her with you. It wasn't a question." She closed her eyes. "I was hoping you'd say that." Micah had already decided to be the world's best brother. He practiced lullabies on his toy xylophone, demanded diaper-changing demonstrations with his stuffed animals, and began sleeping with an extra pillow next to him just in case she needed it. Ellis watched him, half amused, half silent with awe. For a boy who had learned too early what it meant to lose Micah, now lived with an open heart that expected love to return. He'd taught Ellis more about hope than any sermon ever had, The garden bloomed in wild, unorganized joy. Lavender reached for the fence-line tomatoes ripened in uneven bursts, and the carrots came out bent like question marks. But no one minded. The land, as if recognizing it was being loved differently, now responded in kind. Neighbors began to visit. First came Mrs. Halpern from up the ridge, bringing jars of homemade applesauce and unsolicited advice about birthing. Then came Joe and his teenage daughter from the valley, offering to install solar panels on the barn in exchange for vegetables. One Sunday afternoon, a retired music teacher named Clara wandered up with a folding chair and a violin case. "I heard there's a piano," she said, matter of fact, and it's been far too long since I played a duet. By the end of the day, the porch sounded like summer music drifting out under string lights, chairs, full voices louder than the crickets. That night, when everyone had gone, and Micah was asleep beneath a glow-in-the-dark star ceiling, he insisted was for the baby too. Ellis and Serafina sat on the porch in the glow of citronella candles. The 4 chairs stood side by side. One carved with Mira's initials now faint from years of weather. One worn smooth by Ellis's weight. One newer, wrapped in a lavender shawl Serafina had made. And the last smallest one, shining pale under the moonlight. "You think she'll sit in it?" Ellis asked. "When she's ready," Serafina said. "Until then, I think we will." Ellis looked at her. "I didn't think I'd ever have this again." What a porch with 4 chairs, a reason to build more. She took his hand. "You built it because you still believe. That's the part no one tells you about surviving loss. What part that you don't have to stop believing in beauty just because you've seen how fast it can disappear." He let that settle between them. Then he said, "I think Mira would have liked you." Serafina smiled. "I hope so, because I like her. She made you." Ellis exhaled a breath he hadn't realized he was still holding. Before heading inside, Serafina placed a single sprig of lavender in the seat of the smallest chair. "For when she arrives," she said. So she knows her place was ready before she even got here. The morning Serafina went into labor, the sky was still almost reverent soft clouds folding over the valley, like someone had tucked in the world for a sacred moment. It began quietly just before dawn. A wince, a pause in her breath, then another. She stood in the kitchen mid-sentence with her hand resting gently on the edge of the counter. Ellis noticed first. "You okay?" he asked, setting down a bowl of rising dough. She gave a lopsided smile. "I think it's time." He didn't panic, didn't run. He simply moved, gathering the bag they'd packed a week ago, calling the midwife, making sure Micah was dressed, and settled with Mrs. Halpern down the road. The rhythm of the house changed, but not the tone. It wasn't fear. It was readiness. The hours passed like chapters, each one building cresting easing. The living room became sacred space. Blankets warmed by the hearth. A basin of water with lemon and mint. Lavender oil diffused into the air, subtle but grounding. Serafina labored with the same quiet strength she had brought to everything in her life since she arrived, deliberate, focused, full of grace. Ellis stayed by her side, never once letting go of her hand. Between contractions, she rested her forehead against his and whispered, "I'm not afraid." "You don't have to be," he said. "I'm right here." I know she breathed. That's why I'm not. It was nearly midnight when the baby came. A girl. Perfect. 10 fingers. 10 toes. A cry that seemed to rise from something ancient and brand new all at once. She had a head of dark hair and a birthmark shaped like a teardrop at the base of her neck. They wrapped her in a soft muslin cloth. Ellis held her first eyes, shimmering his hands, cradling her, like she was made of glass and light. Then he placed her gently into Serafina's arms. "She looks like you," he whispered. No, Serafina said softly, her eyes never leaving the child. She looks like us. Micah was allowed into the room the next morning, tiptoeing with exaggerated caution, as if the baby were a secret he might scare away. He peered over the edge of the couch and gasped. "She's real," Ellis chuckled. "She sure is." Micah leaned in and whispered to his baby sister, "I'm your big brother. I've been practicing." Then he added more seriously, "We saved you a chair." Serafina looked at Ellis, a lump rising in her throat. They hadn't named the baby. Yet. They wanted to wait to know her, feel who she was beyond the moment of her arrival. And then quietly, Micah spoke again. "We should call her Mira." The room stilled. Serafina blinked. Ellis swallowed hard. "Why?" she asked gently. "Because Mira brought her here." "I dreamed it," Micah said. "She said her name would mean, 'look again.'" Serafina looked at Ellis, and he nodded, barely breathing. "That's what we'll name her," he said. Mira Grace. A name not just carried, but reborn. In the weeks that followed, the rhythm of life slowed into something simpler. Days blurred into feedings, and naps, laughter, and mess light and quiet. Ellis learned to hum lullabies while swaying barefoot across the wooden floors. Serafina became fluent in the language of swaddling and soft rocking, and Micah insisted on reading bedtime stories to both his sister and his rabbit, who now had a dedicated spot in the nursery. Visitors came and went, bringing casseroles and knitted hats and unsolicited parenting advice. But the cabin remained the same, a place of presence, not performance. On the porch, the 4 chairs stayed full. Mira's little one nestled into the new pine chair, often asleep, wrapped in that same lavender-trimmed handkerchief Serafina had once embroidered with trembling hands in a different season. The plaque above the garden gate, Hope Ridge, had become more than just a name. It had become a truth, lived day by day. One morning, as Ellis and Serafina sat beneath the wide Montana sky, she rested her head on his shoulder. "You know what's strange?" she asked. "What I used to think home was a place with doors that locked property lines, and your name on a deed. Something you protect." He looked at her, waiting. But now she continued. "I think home is something you carry. It moves with you. It roots where love stays." Ellis took her hand, their fingers interlacing. "And when it's real," he said, "you don't have to run from it. Or hide it. You just let it grow." They sat like that for a long while, watching Micah chase butterflies, while baby Mira slept against Serafina's chest. That evening, as stars blinked into view, Clara, the violinist, returned with her folding chair. "I have something new," she said. "Something I wrote after hearing that baby cry." She played soft and slow, the notes wrapping around the porch like lullabies made of wind and memory. Serafina joined her on the piano. Ellis rocked Mira in his arms, and Micah, half asleep in his chair, whispered, "This is the best song." No one argued, because they all knew it was true. Inside above Mira Grace's crib hung a hand-lettered sign painted by Serafina in watercolor hues. "You are made of roots and wind and love that never left. We'd love to hear from you. Where are you watching from today? Your stories, your thoughts, and even just a simple hello mean the world to us. If this story touched your heart and you'd like to hear more, like it, please consider subscribing to the channel. We share true to the soul stories of hope, love, and second chances, and we'd be honored to have you with us. Thank you so much for watching. Until next time, stay kind, stay curious, and take care of one another.